Step back from the entrance, ma'am, right now, or I will have you removed from this terminal.
The security supervisor put his arm across the jet bridge doorway, palm flat against the wall, his body filling the space the way a man fills a space when he's decided that nothing behind him belongs to the person in front of him. And every passenger in the boarding area heard the gate agent behind him say, loud enough for row after row of witnesses, "She doesn't have a valid ticket. I've already told her twice." Angela didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She stood exactly where she was, feet planted, boarding pass in her right hand, eyes fixed on the arm across the doorway, and she breathed. One breath, controlled. The breath of a woman who'd spent 36 years navigating rooms that didn't expect her, and who understood that the next 5 seconds would determine everything. The security supervisor was smiling. Not a real smile, the kind you wear when you've decided someone is beneath the conversation, and you want them to know it without saying it. The smile of a man who believed his arm across that doorway was the final word. But here's the part most people miss. The boarding pass in Angela's right hand was valid. It had been scanned and accepted at check-in. It had been printed at the kiosk 40 minutes ago. And the phone in her left hand, the phone she hadn't used yet, the phone she was holding the way you hold something you haven't decided to deploy, that phone had a number in it that could shut down every gate in this airport. He had no idea who he was blocking. And she hadn't decided yet whether to tell him. Let me take you back 22 minutes, because you need to understand what happened at that gate counter before the arm went up and the police were called. Angela Merritt arrived at Charlotte Douglas International Airport at 4:17 p.m. on a Wednesday in mid-October. She parked in the hourly garage, not because she couldn't afford the valet, but because she preferred to walk. She'd been sitting in meetings since 7 that morning. Her back ached. Her ankles were stiff. The walk from the garage to the terminal was 12 minutes, and she used every one of them the way she used every walk, to move, to breathe, to transition from one version of herself to another. The version she was leaving behind was the one that had spent the day in a 5th-floor conference room at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C., reviewing a 900-page regulatory proposal on airline passenger protections. The version she was stepping into was the one who was flying to Atlanta to hold her first grandchild. Her daughter Simone had given birth 4 days ago. A boy, 8 pounds 2 ounces. They'd named him Elijah. Angela had seen photos. She had not yet held him. She'd been trying to get to Atlanta since Monday, but the regulatory review had gone long and the schedule had shifted, and by Tuesday night she'd accepted that the earliest she could leave was Wednesday afternoon. She'd booked a 5:40 p.m. Delta flight from Charlotte to Atlanta. Charlotte Douglas was her home airport. She'd lived in Charlotte for 18 years before the appointment. She still kept a house there. She flew out of Charlotte every week, usually to Washington, sometimes to other cities. She knew this airport the way you know your own kitchen, every corridor, every gate, every coffee stand, every restroom with the shortest line. She was not a person who got lost in airports. She was not a person who got confused by boarding passes. She was not a person who needed help finding her gate. But I need to tell you something about what Angela looked like, because what she looked like is the reason for everything that happened next. And I know that sentence is uncomfortable. I know you don't want it to be true, but it is. She was 63. Brown skin, deep and warm. Her hair was natural silver, cropped close, the kind of cut that says I stopped apologizing for my hair 20 years ago and I'm not starting now. She wore dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a gray wool jacket, not structured, not designer, the kind of jacket you buy because it's warm and it has pockets. Flat leather boots. No jewelry except a thin gold chain that disappeared into the neckline of the turtleneck. She carried one bag, a soft-sided weekender, dark green, packed with 4 days of clothes and the receiving blanket she'd bought for Elijah. A pale yellow blanket, organic cotton, wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of the bag. She looked like a grandmother going to see her grandbaby. She looked like a woman you'd see at church or at the farmer's market or in the school pickup line. She looked like nobody. She did not look like the second highest ranking transportation official in the United States government. And that's exactly what the gate agent saw when Angela walked up to counter at gate B16 and presented her boarding pass. She saw nobody. The gate agent's name was Renee Tillman. She was 34, straight brown hair in a ponytail pulled tight enough to smooth out any softness, dark eyeliner, manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. She'd been with Delta for 6 years, based at Charlotte Douglas the entire time, and she was, by the metrics the airline used to evaluate its employees, good at her job. Fast processing times, low complaint numbers, consistent on-time boarding. The kind of employee who appears in the system as a green dot on every dashboard. But dashboards don't measure what Renee did with her face. Dashboards don't measure the way she looked up when Angela approached the counter, the quick scan, top to bottom, that took less than a second and processed more information than any boarding pass scanner ever could. The gray jacket, the flat boots, the weekender bag with the broken zipper she kept meaning to fix, the face, the skin, the hair. Dashboards don't measure the half-second pause before Renee said, "Can I help you?" The pause that was just long enough to communicate that helping was not what she intended. "I'd like to check in for the 5:40 to Atlanta," Angela said. She placed her boarding pass on the counter, printed, clean. The barcode was right there. Renee looked at it. Not the way you look at a boarding pass to verify information, the way you look at something you've already decided is wrong. She picked it up, held it at an angle, and squinted. This boarding pass was printed at the kiosk. "Yes." "When?" "About 40 minutes ago." Renee set it down. She typed something on her keyboard. She stared at the screen. She typed something else. She stared at the screen again. The performance of diligence, typing, starring, typing went on for 30 seconds. "Now I want you to think about the last time you checked in for a flight. Think about how long it took. You walked up. You showed your pass. They scanned it. You walked to your seat. Maybe 15 seconds, maybe 10. 30 seconds of typing and staring at a screen is not standard. 30 seconds is a person looking for a problem. And when you're looking for a problem, you always find one, even if you have to build it yourself." "Ma'am," Renee said, "there's an issue with your booking." "What kind of issue?" "The system is showing a discrepancy with your reservation. Your boarding pass may not be valid." "I printed it 40 minutes ago. It was accepted at the kiosk." "The kiosk doesn't always catch everything. I'm seeing something in the system that needs to be resolved." Angela looked at Renee. She looked at the screen behind the counter. She couldn't read it from this angle, but she could see the color of the fields. Green meant clear. Red meant flagged. Yellow meant pending. Everything on Renee's screen, from what Angela could see, was green. "What specifically is the system showing?" Angela asked. "I'm not able to share system details with passengers, but there's a discrepancy, and I can't let you board until it's resolved." "How do I resolve it?" "You'll need to go to the main ticketing counter on the first floor and have them reissue your boarding pass." The main ticketing counter, on the first floor, a 15-minute walk from gate B16, through the terminal, down the escalator, across the atrium, to a counter that would have a line, because it always had a line that would take another 20 minutes. By the time she got back, assuming there was nothing wrong with her booking, and there wasn't, the flight would be boarding its final group. Angela understood what was happening. She didn't understand it the way a bystander understands it. That's not right. Somebody should do something. She understood it the way a systems engineer understands a failure, the specific mechanism, the specific input, the specific point where the process deviated from the standard and produced an incorrect output. The mechanism was Renee. The input was Angela's appearance. The output was a fabricated discrepancy designed to create enough friction that Angela would either go away or miss her flight. "I'd like you to scan my boarding pass," Angela said. "If there's a discrepancy, the scanner will flag it. If there isn't, I'd like to proceed to the gate." "I've already told you there's a discrepancy. And I've asked you to verify it by scanning the boarding pass. That's the standard verification procedure." Renee's eyes narrowed. Not dramatically, just enough. The narrowing of a person who has been asked to do the simple, correct thing and has decided that doing it would mean losing. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue with you. I've told you what needs to happen. If you'd like to make your flight, I'd suggest going to the ticketing counter now." Angela didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She placed both hands flat on the counter, an anchoring gesture, the gesture of a person who is planting herself, and she said, very clearly, "I'm not going to the ticketing counter. My boarding pass is valid. I'd like to board my flight." Renee stared at her for 3 seconds. Then she picked up the desk phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. "Yeah, Daniel, it's Renee at B16. I've got a passenger situation. Can you come down?" She hung up. "Security will be here in a moment," she said to Angela. Then she looked past Angela, physically past her, as if Angela had become transparent and called out to the next person in line, "I can help the next passenger." But this was only the beginning. Daniel Voss arrived at gate B16 in 4 minutes. He was the shift supervisor for the airport's contract security team, not TSA, not airport police, but the private security company that Charlotte Douglas hired to supplement its security operations in the terminal common areas. He was 41, broad-shouldered, military haircut, the bearing of a man who had maybe been in the military once, or maybe just wanted people to think he had been. He wore a dark uniform with a shoulder patch that read Sentinel Security SCRVICES, and he carried a radio, a flashlight, and a pair of flex cuffs on his belt. He did not carry a weapon. He did not carry a badge. He did not have arrest authority. He had the legal standing of a mall cop: observe, report, and wait for real law enforcement if the situation required it. But he walked into gate B16 like he owned the airport. "What's the problem?" he said, to Renee, not to Angela. "This passenger has a boarding pass discrepancy, and she's refusing to go to ticketing to resolve it. She's refusing to leave the counter." "I'm not refusing to leave the counter," Angela said. "I'm requesting that she scan my boarding pass. She hasn't scanned it." Daniel looked at Angela. The same scan Renee had done top to bottom, less than a second, the brain completing its circuit before the eyes finished their sweep. Gray jacket, flat boots, brown skin, silver hair. "Ma'am, if the gate agent says there's a discrepancy, then there's a discrepancy. You need to go to ticketing and get it resolved." "There is no discrepancy. She hasn't verified anything. She hasn't scanned my boarding pass. She's looked at it visually and decided there's a problem, but she hasn't used the scanner." "Ma'am, I've been flying out of this airport for 18 years. I know how the boarding process works. The scanner is right there." She pointed at the handheld device sitting on the counter, 3 inches from Renee's right hand. "It takes 2 seconds. If there's a discrepancy, the scanner will show it. If there isn't, I board my flight." Daniel looked at the scanner. He looked at Renee. Something passed between them, not a word, not a signal, but a mutual understanding. The understanding of 2 people who have decided that the person in front of them is wrong, and who have committed to that decision so thoroughly that the simple act of scanning a boarding pass has become, in their minds, a capitulation. If they scanned the pass and it came up clean, they were wrong. And being wrong, in front of passengers, in front of each other, in front of the authority they'd claimed, that was more expensive than anything Angela Merritt could cost them. Or so they thought. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time," Daniel said. He stepped forward. He positioned himself between Angela and the jet bridge entrance. His arm went up, palm flat against the wall, body blocking the doorway. "Step back from the entrance, right now, or I will have you removed from this terminal." And that's where we came in. The gate area of B-16 held approximately 60 passengers waiting for the 5:40 to Atlanta. They were arranged in the standard airport formation, some seated, some standing, some leaning against columns with their phones and their coffees, and the particular glazed expressions of people who have been in airports long enough to stop seeing them. But they were seeing this. They were seeing a 63-year-old black woman standing in front of a security guard's extended arm, while a gate agent behind him processed other passengers as if Angela had ceased to exist. They were seeing the arm. They were seeing Angela's face, calm, still, the face of a woman who was not going to shout and was not going to cry, and was not going to perform the kind of distress that would make this moment legible to people who needed distress as proof of injustice. She was just standing there, holding her boarding pass, waiting. And she was noticing things. This is the part you need to understand about Angela Merritt, because it's the thing that made her who she was and the thing that the people blocking her couldn't see. Angela noticed things. She'd been noticing things since she was 11 years old, and her mother, a woman named Dorothy, who cleaned rooms at the Hilton in downtown Charlotte, had taught her the most important lesson she'd ever learn. Dorothy used to say, "The world tells you who it is every second of every day. Most people aren't paying attention. You pay attention." Angela paid attention. She noticed that Renee had not scanned a single boarding pass for the 3 passengers she'd processed since turning Angela away. She'd glanced at them, one glance each, and waved them through. No scanner, no verification. The scanner sat on the counter like a prop. She noticed that Daniel's radio was set to channel 3, which she could see from the LED display on his shoulder unit. Channel 3 at Charlotte Douglas was the Contract Security General channel, not the TSA operational channel, not the airport police channel. He was not connected to any federal or law enforcement frequency. If he needed actual police, he'd have to call them on his phone. She noticed that the jet bridge door behind Daniel was open, and through it she could see the aircraft, a Boeing 737-900 Delta tail number visible through the jet bridge window. The aircraft door was open. Passengers were walking down the bridge and boarding. The plane was right there. Her seat was right there. She noticed that a man in the 4th row of seats, 50s, gray suit, reading glasses, a face she'd seen before but couldn't place, was watching her with an expression that was neither passive nor detached. He was watching the way a person watches when they're gathering information, recording without recording. And she noticed one more thing, the thing that changed her calculation. She noticed a young black woman, early 20s, college sweatshirt, backpack, AirPods, standing 6 feet behind her, boarding pass in hand, waiting to board. The young woman was watching what was happening to Angela with an expression that Angela recognized instantly. Not fear, not surprise, resignation. The expression of a person who had seen this before, seen a black woman stopped, questioned, blocked, and who was calculating in real time whether this was about to happen to her too. That expression is the reason Angela didn't walk away. Not her pride, not her title, not her authority, the young woman's face. Because Angela had understood for 36 years, had understood since Dorothy taught her to pay attention, that what happened to her at this gate was not about her. It was about the young woman behind her. It was about every person who would walk up to this counter tomorrow, and the day after and the year after, and be sorted by Renee's 1-second scan into "welcome aboard," or "there's a discrepancy," based on the only variable that changed between passengers. Angela looked at her boarding pass. She looked at the arm across the door. She looked at Daniel. "I'd like to speak with a Delta supervisor," she said. "I am the supervisor. Your airport security. I'd like to speak with a Delta supervisor." The gate agent has made her decision. I'm supporting it. The gate agent hasn't made a decision. She's made an assumption. And your job is to ensure passenger safety, not to enforce a gate agent's assumptions. I'd like a Delta supervisor. Now. Daniel's jaw tightened. She watched the muscles work under the skin. She watched him decide. What she didn't know was who was watching him decide. The man in the fourth row gray suit, reading glasses, had taken out his phone. He wasn't recording. Not yet. He was texting. His name was Marcus Coleman. He was 52. He was a partner at Coleman, Yates & Breen, an aviation law firm based in Atlanta. He represented airlines. He represented airports. He represented passengers. He'd spent 23 years in the legal architecture of the aviation industry, and he'd seen enough gate disputes to fill a courtroom. But he'd never seen one like this. He'd never seen a gate agent refuse to scan a boarding pass. That was the detail that had caught his attention, not the confrontation, not the security officer, but the scanner sitting on the counter untouched. Because Marcus Coleman knew from 23 years of practice that a boarding pass scan was the single most important piece of evidence in any passenger dispute. A scan created a digital record, time-stamped, system-verified, unalterable. If the pass was valid, the scan proved it. If it wasn't, the scan proved that too. Not scanning the pass meant not creating a record. And not creating a record meant the gate agent's word was the only evidence. And the gate agent's word, in a he-said-she-said dispute, would be backed by the airline's institutional presumption that its employees were acting correctly. Marcus had seen this pattern before. He'd seen it in depositions. He'd seen it in complaint files. He'd seen it in the DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection Database, where passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment at gates were cataloged and reviewed, and occasionally resulted in enforcement action. He was texting his associate in Atlanta. The text said, "Gate B16 CLT. Watch. May need to pull DOT complaint data on the station. Gate agent refusing to scan a boarding pass for a black female passenger. Sending to secondary. Security involved." His associate texted back, recording. Marcus looked at the scene. He looked at his phone. He made a decision. Not yet observing. But what Angela didn't know, and what Renee and Daniel certainly didn't know, was that Marcus Coleman wasn't just an aviation lawyer. He was also a member of the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee. An unpaid, volunteer position that gave him no authority, no enforcement power, and no special access. What it gave him was a phone number, the direct line to the director of the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, a woman named Patricia Ngozi, who had been in her position for 7 years and who did not tolerate discriminatory treatment at gates. Marcus hadn't called Patricia yet. He was still observing. But his phone was in his hand. 3 minutes passed. No Delta supervisor came. Renee hadn't called one. She'd called Daniel. Daniel was the response. Boarding continued behind them. Passengers streamed past Angela, past the arm, past the confrontation, through the jet bridge door and onto the plane. Each one showed a boarding pass. Each one was waved through by a second gate agent, a younger woman named Kayla who had appeared from somewhere and who was processing the boarding line with the specific head-down focus of someone who could see what was happening and had decided not to look. Angela watched the passengers board. She counted. 11 passengers walked past her in 3 minutes. All 11 were waved through with a glance. No scanning, no verification, no discrepancy. She was keeping time. She was keeping count. She was building a record in her head, the record that Dorothy had taught her to build, the record that 36 years in government had refined into a practice so automatic that she didn't have to think about it anymore. It just happened. Time, count, words, actions, sequence. She also noticed something that tightened her stomach. The young black woman with the college sweatshirt, the one who'd been standing behind Angela, had stepped out of line. She'd moved to the side. She was sitting in one of the Gateria chairs, her boarding pass in her lap, her AirPods out, watching. She hadn't tried to board. Angela understood why. The young woman had looked at the arm across the door and the security uniform and the gate agent's face, and she'd made a calculation. The fast, unconscious calculation that black people make in airports and stores and offices, and every space where authority is wielded by someone who might wield it differently depending on who's standing in front of them, and she decided to wait, to let the situation resolve, to not be next. That calculation, that specific, learned, survival-based calculation that a 20-year-old black woman in a college sweatshirt should never have to make at an airport gate in the United States of America. Angela looked at the young woman. The young woman looked back. Their eyes met. And in that half-second of contact, something passed between them, not words, not a signal, but a recognition. The recognition of shared experience. The recognition that this moment was not new, that it was ancient, that it had been happening in different forms at different doors for longer than either of them had been alive. Angela turned back to Daniel. "I'm going to ask you one more time," she said. "Please have a Delta supervisor come to this gate. And I'm going to tell you one more time, the decision's been made. You need to go to ticketing. The decision that was made is that a gate agent looked at me, decided I didn't belong in whatever seat I'm assigned to, and fabricated a reason not to let me board. That's not a ticketing issue. That's something else. And I think you know what it is." She said something else, the way you leave a door open, not slamming, not closing, just ajar, letting the air through, letting Daniel hear the draft of what she wasn't saying out loud, the word she hadn't used, the word that hung in the silence like smoke. Daniel heard it. His face darkened, not with shame, with anger. The anger of a person who has been accused of something they haven't been accused of yet, which means they've accused themselves. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're implying, but I don't appreciate it." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking for a supervisor. And I'm calling the police." He reached for his phone. Not his radio, his phone. Because his radio was on Channel 3, and the police were on a different system, and the only way to reach them was the 10-digit number for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Airport Division. He dialed, he waited, someone picked up. "Yeah, this is Daniel Voss, Sentinel Security, Gate B16. I've got a passenger who's refusing to comply with gate agent instructions and who's being confrontational. Can I get an officer down here?" Confrontational. Angela Merritt had not raised her voice. She had not made a threatening gesture. She had not moved toward anyone. She had asked 3 times for a supervisor and twice for her boarding pass to be scanned. That was the totality of her confrontation. But the word was in the air now. Confrontational. And when the police arrived, that word would be the first thing they heard, before they saw Angela, before they assessed the situation, before they had a single piece of evidence. They would hear confrontational, and the word would do its work, the invisible, preparatory work of framing a person as a problem before the person has a chance to be a person. Angela heard Daniel make the call. She heard the word. She understood what it meant. And she made her decision. She reached into the pocket of her gray jacket. She took out her phone. Here's the part that changes everything. She didn't make the call right away. I need you to understand that because the timing matters. She stood there, phone in her hand, and she paused. 5 seconds. 10. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Renee, who was behind the counter processing passengers, not looking at Angela, performing the act of normalcy as if a 63-year-old woman wasn't being detained 10 feet away. She looked at the young woman in the college sweatshirt, still sitting in the chair, still watching. She was deciding. Not whether to make the call. She'd already decided that. She was deciding how to frame it. Because Angela Merritt had spent 36 years in government, and 36 years in government teaches you that the way you use power is as important as whether you use it. Power used rashly creates chaos. Power used precisely creates change. And the difference between the two is preparation. She opened her contacts. She scrolled to a name. PietriSaNGOZI.OACP. Patricia Ngozi, Director of the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, U.S. Department of Transportation. The person whose job it was literally, specifically, exclusively, to investigate and enforce federal regulations prohibiting unfair and discriminatory treatment of airline passengers. Patricia was Angela's subordinate. She reported to Angela's office. Angela could have called her as a boss calling an employee. She could have said, "Patricia, this is the deputy secretary. Send someone to Charlotte Douglas. Now." She didn't. She called Patricia as a passenger filing a real-time complaint. Because Angela understood something that most powerful people don't. She understood that using her title to solve her personal problem would solve her personal problem and nothing else. Renee would scan her boarding pass. Daniel would step aside. Angela would board her flight. And tomorrow, Renee would do the same thing to the next woman who looked like Angela, and Daniel would back her up, and the system would continue to produce the same output because the input had never been corrected. But a passenger complaint, a real-time, documented, specific passenger complaint filed through the proper federal channel, triggered a process. A formal process with case numbers and investigation timelines and regulatory teeth. A process that didn't depend on Angela's title. A process that would protect the next woman at the next gate on the next day that Angela wasn't there. She was going to use the system, not to rescue herself, to fix the door. She pressed call. Patricia Ngozi picked up on the second ring. "Angela." "Patricia, I'm calling as a passenger. I need to file a real-time complaint." Patricia paused. She knew Angela's voice the way you know the voice of someone you've briefed 100 times. And she knew, from the tone, from the specific words calling as a passenger, from the careful framing, that something was happening that was both personal and procedural. "Go ahead," Patricia said. Her voice shifted. Professional mode. The recording mode that kicks in when a senior federal official calls you and uses the word complaint. "I'm at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Gate Delta Flight 1247 to Atlanta. Scheduled departure 5:40 p.m. I've been denied boarding by a gate agent who claims there's a discrepancy with my reservation. She has refused to scan my boarding pass. She has refused to verify the discrepancy through the system. She has called airport contract security, who has physically blocked me from the jet bridge and is currently calling Charlotte Mecklenburg PD. She said it the way she said everything in her professional life, structured, sequenced, specific. Fact, fact, fact. No adjectives, no emotion. The emotion was there, it was in her chest, it was in her jaw, it was in the burn on her right wrist where the strap of her weekender had been digging in for the past 15 minutes, but she didn't let it into her voice. Because the voice was the record, and the record had to be clean. "Have you identified yourself?" Patricia asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because my identity shouldn't be relevant to whether my boarding pass is valid." Patricia was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a woman doing rapid calculations, legal, procedural, political. Then, "I'm going to initiate 3 actions simultaneously. First, I'm opening a formal complaint file. Case number will be generated within the hour. Second, I'm contacting Delta's corporate office to request an immediate intervention at Gate B16. Third, I'm notifying the Federal Security Director at Charlotte Douglas that a passenger is being denied boarding without documented cause and that law enforcement has been called to the gate." "Thank you, Patricia." "Angela, is there anything else I should know?" "The gate agent hasn't scanned a single boarding pass for any passenger today. She's waving them through on visual inspection. I've observed 11 passengers board without verification. And the security supervisor who's blocking me is a contract officer with no law enforcement authority. He's carrying flex cuffs." Patricia's voice sharpened. "He's carrying restraints." "On his belt." "Has he attempted to use them?" "Not yet." "Stay on the line, I'm making the calls now. You'll hear me go silent, I'm not hanging up." "Understood." Angela held the phone to her ear. She could hear Patricia's fingers on a keyboard. She could hear the muffled sound of a second phone being picked up, Patricia's desk phone, the one she used for agency calls while keeping the cell line open. And she waited. Daniel was still on his phone, still talking to the police dispatch. He hadn't noticed that Angela was also on the phone. He was packing a small circuit, 3 steps left, 3 steps right, the nervous energy of a man who was in deeper than he wanted to be but who couldn't see the bottom yet. Renee was behind the counter. She'd finished processing the boarding line. The gate area was thinning. The flight was nearly fully boarded. Angela's seat, 14A, a window, the seat she always chose because she liked to see the wing, was sitting empty on a plane full of passengers. The young black woman in the college sweatshirt was still in her chair. She hadn't moved. But Marcus Coleman had. Marcus had been watching the entire time. He'd watched Daniel make the police call. He'd watched Angela take out her phone. He'd watched the way she'd held it. Not urgently, not desperately, but deliberately, the way a chess player picks up a piece when they've already seen the board 8 moves ahead. And now Marcus was standing. He'd put his reading glasses in his pocket. He'd picked up his briefcase, and he was walking toward the counter. Not toward Angela, not toward Daniel, toward Renee. "Excuse me," he said. Renee looked up. She saw a white man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase and the particular energy of someone who belonged in first class. She gave him the smile she gave first-class passengers, the full one, the one with eye contact and warmth. "How can I help you, sir?" "I've been sitting in that row for the past 20 minutes. I've watched you deny this woman boarding." He nodded toward Angela. "And I've watched you board 11 passengers without scanning a single boarding pass. Can you explain that?" Renee's smile contracted. Not all the way. She caught it, held it, stretched it into something that looked like patience but was closer to alarm. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss another passenger's situation." "I'm not asking about her situation. I'm asking about yours. You have a scanner on your counter. You haven't used it. Not for her, not for anyone. Why?" "Our boarding procedures are at the gate agent's discretion." "No, they're not. Delta's Contract of Carriage, Section 7, Paragraph 3, requires electronic verification of all boarding documents. It's not discretionary, it's policy. You're not following it." Renee stared at him. The smile was gone now. In its place was the particular expression of a person who has been doing something wrong for so long that they've forgotten it was wrong, and who is now being confronted with the specific, granular evidence of their wrongness by someone who speaks their language. Marcus reached into his briefcase. He took out a business card. He set it on the counter. "Marcuscoleman, ESQ. Partner Coleman, YATES and BREN. Aviation law." "I'm an aviation attorney," he said. "I've filed more complaints than you've processed boarding passes. And what I've watched you do in the past 20 minutes is a textbook violation of 49 U.S.C. Section 40,127, the federal statute prohibiting discrimination in air transportation." He said it quietly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform indignation. He said it the way Angela had said everything, with precision, with specificity, with the calm authority of a person who is stating facts because facts are the only weapons that don't backfire. Renee looked at the card. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Daniel, who had hung up his phone and was watching this new development with the expression of a man who had expected reinforcements and was instead watching the walls close in. "Daniel," Renee said, "this man is interfering with." "This man is a witness," Marcus said, "and I'm informing you, both of you, that I intend to provide a sworn statement to the Department of Transportation regarding what I've observed today. I'm also informing you that there is a federal statute, 49 U.S.C. Section 46,504, that makes it a crime to interfere with a passenger's right to board a flight they've paid for without lawful cause." He didn't blink. He didn't back down. He stood at the counter with his business card between them and let the weight of 23 years of aviation law sit on Renee's shoulders like a coat she couldn't take off. And then something happened that neither Marcus nor Angela nor Daniel nor Renee expected. The young woman in the college sweatshirt stood up. She walked to the counter. She stood beside Angela. She held out her boarding pass. "I'd like to board too," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, not bold in the way that bravery is loud, steady in the way that a decision is steady, the quiet, private click of a person who has been sitting in a chair calculating the cost and who has decided that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of standing up. Angela looked at her. The young woman looked back, and something in Angela's chest, something that had been clenched since the arm went across the door, loosened. Not because the cavalry had arrived, because a 20-year-old stranger had decided, on her own, without being asked, that she wasn't going to wait for this to be resolved. She was going to stand next to the woman it was happening to. "What's your name?" Angela asked. "Monique Stafford." Angela would remember that name for the rest of her life. "Monique, you don't have to do this." "I know. I've been watching her wave people through for 20 minutes. She didn't look at any of their passes. She looked at mine when I walked up earlier, looked at it for a long time. I went and sat down because I didn't want to deal with it, but I'm not sitting down anymore." Renee's face had gone the color of old wax. 2 passengers at her counter, an aviation lawyer with a business card, a security guard who was no longer packing but standing very still, the stillness of a man who had just realized that the ground he was standing on was made of something much thinner than he thought. And then Renee's phone rang. Not the gate phone, her personal phone, the one in her back pocket. She pulled it out. She looked at the screen. Her face changed, not from pale to paler, from pale to something else entirely. Something that looked like a person who has just seen the incoming call from a number they recognize and fear. "I need to take this," she said to no one in particular. She answered the phone. She listened. She didn't speak. She listened for 20 seconds, and with each second her posture changed, the shoulders dropping, the jaw loosening, the entire architecture of her certainty dismantling itself one brick at a time. "Yes, sir," she said. "Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, she's right here." She lowered the phone. She looked at Angela. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice was different now. The crisp efficiency was gone. In its place was the thin, careful voice of a person who is trying very hard to say the right thing because they've just been told that everything they've said for the past 20 minutes was wrong. The Delta station manager is on his way to the gate. He asked me to scan your boarding pass immediately." Angela held out the boarding pass. Renee took it. Her hands were shaking, the fine tremor, not visible from a distance but unmistakable up close. She picked up the scanner that had been sitting on the counter for 22 minutes, untouched, unused, and she scanned the boarding pass. The scanner beeped. The screen showed green. MERITT, ANGLAD seat 14A confirmed. No discrepancy, no flag, no issue. A clean, valid, confirmed boarding pass for a seat that had been waiting for her since she booked it. Renee set the scanner down. She looked at the screen. She looked at Angela. And whatever she saw in Angela's face, the calm, the stillness, the absolute absence of surprise, told her something that the phone call hadn't. The phone call had told her she was wrong. Angela's face told her she'd always been wrong, that Angela had known it the entire time. That every minute of the past 22 minutes had been a woman standing in front of a locked door, holding the key, watching the person with the lock pretend the key didn't exist. "You're confirmed," Renee said. The words came out small. "You can board." "I know," Angela said. She didn't move toward the jet bridge. She waited. The Delta station manager arrived at gate B16 in 3 minutes. His name was Gerald Humphreys. He was 56. He'd been with Delta for 29 years. He was the senior operational manager at Charlotte Douglas, responsible for every Delta gate, every Delta flight, every Delta employee at the airport. He was good at his job. He was good at it because he understood that an airline is not an abstraction. It's a series of human interactions, gate by gate, moment by moment, and the quality of those interactions determines whether the airline survives or doesn't. He walked into the gate area with the specific, focused stride of a man who has been told something on the phone that he doesn't want to believe, but that he knows is true. He'd been called by Delta's corporate customer relations team, who had been called by Patricia Ngozzi's office at the dot, who had been called by Angela. The cascade, one phone call, 3 connections, 7 minutes from Angela's phone to Gerald's phone. Gerald saw Angela. He saw Renee. He saw Daniel. He saw Marcus Coleman standing at the counter with his business card still sitting on the surface. He saw Monique Stafford standing beside Angela. He processed the scene in 4 seconds. 29 years of airline operations had given him the ability to read a gate area the way a paramedic reads a trauma scene. Who's hurt? Who caused it? What needs to happen first? "Ms. Merritt," he said. "Yes." "I'm Gerald Humphreys, Delta Station Manager. I owe you an apology, and I owe you an explanation." "I'd like both, but I'd like the explanation first." Gerald looked at Renee. "Ms. Tillman, did you scan this passenger's boarding pass before denying her boarding?" Renee swallowed. I identified a discrepancy." "Did you scan the boarding pass?" "Not initially." "Not initially? Not at all. You didn't scan it until corporate called you, is that correct?" "I used my judgment." "Your judgment is not a substitute for the scanner. The scanner is the verification system. Your judgment is not. Did you have any system-generated alert, flag, or notification regarding Ms. Merritt's reservation?" "No." "Then on what basis did you deny her boarding?" The question sat in the air. The same question that had been sitting in the air for 22 minutes, the question Angela had asked, that Marcus had asked, that the scanner had answered, that everyone in the gate area already knew the answer to. Renee didn't answer. She looked at her hands. She looked at the counter. She looked at the scanner that she hadn't used. Gerald turned back to Angela. "Ms. Merritt, I'm deeply sorry. What happened here is unacceptable. It violates Delta's procedures, it violates your rights as a passenger, and it violates the trust that every passenger places in us when they buy a ticket. I take full responsibility." "I appreciate that, Gerald, but I need to tell you something before we go further." She reached into her jacket pocket. She took out a slim leather case, the kind that holds a government ID and a credential. She opened it. She held it up so Gerald could see it, so Renee could see it, so Daniel could see it. U.S. Department of Transportation. Angela Merritt. Deputy Secretary. Gerald Humphreys looked at the credential. He looked at Angela. He looked at the credential again. The Deputy Secretary of Transportation. The person who oversaw the Federal Aviation Administration. The person who oversaw the Transportation Security Administration. The person who oversaw the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, the office that Patricia Ngozzi ran, the office that had just called Delta's corporate headquarters. The person who, in the organizational chart of the United States government, was the second highest authority over every airline, every airport, and every aviation security operation in the country. The person that Renee Tillman had told to go to the ticketing counter. The person that Daniel Voss had blocked with his arm. Gerald's face went through the sequence, the one you've seen before, the one that every person in these stories goes through when the mountain reveals itself behind the woman they mistook for nobody. Hearing, processing, recognizing, the blood leaving the face, the air leaving the lungs, the world rearranging itself around a new center of gravity. "Deputy Secretary," Gerald said. His voice had changed, not louder, thinner. the voice of a man standing at the base of a mountain he'd failed to see. We didn't know. I know you didn't know, Angela said. That's the point. She closed the credential case. She put it back in her pocket. If you'd known who I was, this wouldn't have happened. The boarding pass would have been scanned in 2 seconds. I would have been welcomed aboard with a smile. I would have been offered an upgrade, because that's what happens when the system knows who it's dealing with. She paused. But when the system doesn't know, when the person at the counter is just a woman in a gray jacket with a weekender bag and the wrong skin, the system produces a different output. The same system, different output, based on one variable. She let that sit. I didn't come here today as the deputy secretary. I came as a passenger, a grandmother trying to get to Atlanta to hold her grandson for the first time, and I was treated like a trespasser. The gate area was silent. 60 passengers, some seated, some standing, some in the jet bridge, some already on the plane, were silent. The silence was not empty. It was full of the thing that nobody wanted to name, but that everyone could feel, the specific, heavy, atmospheric pressure of a truth that had been in the room the entire time and had only now been given enough space to expand. Renee Tillman was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet, leaking kind of crying that happens when the wall you've been standing behind dissolves and there's nothing left between you and the thing you did. Daniel Voss was standing against the wall, arms at his sides, staring at the floor. The arm that had been across the doorway was now pressed against his own thigh, as if he could retroactively withdraw it by making it smaller. And Monique Stafford, the young woman in the college sweatshirt, was looking at Angela with an expression that was no longer resignation. It was something else. Something that Angela recognized because she'd worn it herself decades ago, when she'd watched a woman stand her ground and realized, for the first time, that standing your ground was an option. "Miss Stafford," Angela said. She turned to Monique. "Would you like to board?" Monique held out her boarding pass. Gerald took it. He scanned it himself, the station manager, personally scanning a boarding pass because he understood that the gesture mattered. That after 22 minutes of a scanner sitting unused on a counter, the act of scanning was not administrative. It was corrective. The scanner beeped green. "Welcome aboard," Gerald said. Monique walked toward the jet bridge. She paused at the door. She looked back at Angela. "Thank you," she said. "You stood up," Angela said. "Thank yourself." Monique disappeared down the jet bridge. Angela picked up her weekender bag. She looked at Gerald. "I'll be filing a formal complaint through my office, but I want to be clear about what I'm seeking. Not punishment. Process. I want to know why the boarding pass scanner wasn't used. I want to know how many passengers at this gate have been denied boarding without system verification in the past 12 months. I want to know whether there's a pattern, and if there is, I want it corrected." "You'll have full cooperation," Gerald said. "I know I will," she paused. "One more thing, the contract security officer." She looked at Daniel. "He's carrying flexcuffs. He's not authorized to restrain passengers. He called CMPD and described me as confrontational. I was not confrontational. The police call should be canceled and the recording should be preserved for the complaint file." Gerald nodded. He was already on his phone, already handling it, already doing the work of a man who understood that the next 30 minutes of his life were going to determine whether his career survived the past 30. Angela walked to the jet bridge. She walked through it, slowly, the way she walked everywhere now, the measured pace of a woman whose body had opinions about stairs and distances, and standing for 22 minutes in flat boots on a terminal floor. She walked onto the plane. She found row 14. She put her bag in the overhead bin. She sat down in 14A. She looked out the window at the wing. She took out her phone. She texted Simone. "On the plane, landing at 7:15. I'll be there by 8. Kiss Elijah for me." Simone texted back immediately. "A photo. A tiny brown face, eyes closed, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Below the photo, "He's waiting for you, Mama." Angela looked at the photo. She looked at it for a long time. She touched the screen with her thumb as if she could feel the weight of him through the glass. The plane pushed back. The engine spooled. Charlotte Douglas fell away beneath her. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 22 minutes, she exhaled. Now, let me tell you what happened after the plane landed. Because the landing is where most people think the story ends, and the landing is where the story actually begins. Angela held Elijah that night. She held him in the rocking chair in Simone's guest room, and he was warm and small and impossibly light, and he smelled like new skin and baby soap. And she held him against her chest and felt his heartbeat and her heartbeat, and the two of them syncing up the way hearts do when a grandmother meets a grandchild for the first time. She didn't tell Simone what happened at the gate. Not that night. That night was Elijah's. It belonged to him. She told Simone the next morning over coffee, while Elijah slept in the bassinet and the Atlanta sun came through the kitchen window. She told it the way she told everything, calmly, specifically, without adjectives. She described the gate agent. She described the security guard. She described the arm across the door and the scanner on the counter, and the 22 minutes she spent standing on the wrong side of a door she'd paid to walk through. Simone listened. She was 34. She was a pediatric resident at Emory. She was not a woman who cried easily, but she cried now not from sadness, from something older and heavier, from the specific grief of a daughter hearing that her mother was treated the way her mother had always told her she'd be treated, and realizing that knowing it would happen didn't make it hurt less. "Mama," Simone said, "you should have told them who you were. If I'd told them who I was, they would have let me through, and tomorrow they'd do it to someone else. But you wouldn't have had to stand there for 22 minutes. I know, I counted." Angela took a sip of coffee. Simone, the woman behind that counter, didn't see a deputy secretary. She saw a black woman in a gray jacket, and she decided in less than a second that the black woman in the gray jacket didn't belong in whatever seat she was assigned to. Telling her my title would have changed what she did. It wouldn't have changed what she saw. So what changes what she sees? Systems, training, accountability, data, the boring things, the things that don't go viral, the things that take years and that nobody remembers because nobody was watching when they were implemented. She set down her coffee. "I filed the complaint as a passenger, not as the deputy secretary, as a passenger, because the complaint system is supposed to work for passengers. If it only works when the passenger happens to be a federal official, then the system is broken. And fixing broken systems is what I do." Here's the part most people miss. The part that doesn't make the highlight reel. The part that happens in offices and emails and conference rooms, in the weeks and months after the moment at the gate. The DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection opened a formal investigation into the complaint. The investigation was not limited to the Angela Merritt incident. It was expanded, at Angela's request, but through Patricia Ngozzi's authority, not Angela's, because Angela had recused herself from any decision involving her own complaint, to include a review of boarding denial data at Charlotte Douglas, with a specific focus on whether denials correlated with passenger demographics. The data was requested from Delta. Delta provided it. They didn't resist. Gerald Humphreys made sure of that. What the data showed was not dramatic. It was not a smoking gun. It was something quieter and in many ways worse. Over the past 24 months, passengers who were denied boarding at Charlotte Douglas gates for reservation discrepancies were disproportionately black, not by a small margin, by a factor of 3.7. Black passengers accounted for 21% of the passenger population at Charlotte Douglas, but 63% of boarding denials based on discrepancy designations. And here's the detail that turned the data from a statistic into an indictment. In 78% of those denials, the boarding pass was never scanned. The gate agent made the determination visually, looked at the pass, looked at the passenger, and decided. No verification, no system check, just judgment. The scanner was right there, 3 inches from their hand. It takes 2 seconds, and 78% of the time for black passengers denied boarding, it was never used. The investigation also found that the contract security company, Sentinel Security Services, had no formal training protocol for its officers on passenger rights, detention authority, or the legal limits of their role. Officers like Daniel Voss were given a badge, a radio, and a 40-hour training course that covered building security, crowd management, and fire evacuation. It did not cover aviation law. It did not cover the contract of carriage. It did not cover the fact that they could not legally detain a passenger, or cuff a passenger, or block a passenger from accessing a gate they had a valid ticket for. Daniel Voss didn't know he couldn't do what he did. He'd never been told, and nobody had checked because nobody was checking. The investigation resulted in 3 actions. First, Delta was required to implement mandatory electronic verification of all boarding documents at Charlotte Douglas, no visual-only determinations, no gate agent discretion. Every pass scanned, every scan recorded, every denial documented with a system-generated reason code that the gate agent couldn't fabricate. Second, the contract security company was required to revise its training program to include aviation passenger rights education, detention authority limitations, and bias awareness training. Officers who failed the certification were removed from airport assignments. Third, a civil penalty was assessed against Delta for the pattern of boarding denials without verification. The amount was not public, but industry sources estimated it in the high 6 figures. Renee Tillman was terminated, not for the Angela Merritt incident specifically, for the pattern. The data showed that Renee's boarding denial rate for black passengers was 4.2 times her denial rate for white passengers. The disparity was not explainable by any operational factor. It was explained by one factor only. And when Delta's HR team sat Renee down and showed her her numbers from her gates, over 24 months, she didn't argue. She didn't deny. She sat in the chair and looked at the spreadsheet and saw, for the first time, the architecture of something she'd been building without blueprints. She didn't say, "I'm not racist." People who see their own data usually don't. The data doesn't care about the label. The data just shows what happened. Whether Renee changed, truly, fundamentally, in the way that a person's neural pathways have to rewire for the change to be real, is not something I can tell you. That's her work. That's years of work. That's the work that happens after the spreadsheet and the termination and the silence of a car ride home when you're no longer the person you told yourself you were. Daniel Voss was removed from airport assignments. He was reassigned to a warehouse security detail in an industrial park near the airport. He didn't contest it. The flex cuffs were removed from his belt. He was never told, specifically, why everything changed. He just knew that one afternoon at gate B16, something broke and the pieces landed on him. Marcus Coleman filed his own complaint, independent of Angela's. His complaint included a detailed, time-stamped account of everything he'd observed: the boarding denials, the unscanned passes, the security response, the language used. He also filed a notice with the DOTS Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee, recommending a system-wide audit of boarding verification compliance across all major carriers. The audit was approved. It took 18 months. It covered 14 airlines and 212 airports. It was the most comprehensive review of boarding procedures since the post-9/11 security overhaul. The findings were consistent with Charlotte Douglas. Not identical, some airports were better, some were worse, but the pattern was national. At airports across the country, boarding pass scanning was inconsistent. Gate agents routinely used visual inspection instead of electronic verification. And when they did, the passengers who were flagged, questioned and denied were disproportionately non-white. The audit resulted in an FAA advisory circular, a guidance document, not a regulation, but one that carried the weight of the agency's authority, recommending mandatory electronic verification of all boarding documents at all commercial airports. The advisory was adopted by every major carrier within 12 months. It started with a scanner on a counter, a scanner that was right there, 3 inches from a gate agent's hand, 2 seconds to use. And a woman who asked 3 times calmly, specifically, without raising her voice for it to be used. Be honest with me, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, gone to ticketing, accepted the discrepancy, and let the system shuffle you to the back of the line? Would you have shouted, made a scene, pulled out your phone and started recording, and hoped that the video would go viral and the court of public opinion would deliver the justice that the gate counter wouldn't? Or would you have done what Angela did, stood there, counted the minutes, noticed the scanner, noticed the passengers walking past, noticed the young woman who sat down because she didn't want to be next, and made one phone call not to save yourself but to start a process that would save the next person? I don't know what I would have done. I'd like to think I'd have Angela's patience. I'd like to think I'd have her precision. But patience and precision are not natural resources. They're engineered. They're built over decades, one humiliation at a time, one deep breath at a time, one decision at a time, to choose the system over the spectacle, because the system is slower but the system lasts. Angela Merritt chose the system. And the system, imperfect, slow, frustrating, maddeningly bureaucratic, worked. Not because it always works. It doesn't. It works when someone who understands it takes the time to use it correctly, to feed it the right inputs, to document the right details, to file the right complaint through the right channel with the right specificity. It works when someone does the boring part. Angela did the boring part. She filed the complaint. She provided the data. She recused herself from the decision. She let the process run. She didn't give interviews. She didn't go on cable news. She didn't write an op-ed. She held her grandson. And somewhere in Washington, in an office she'd walked past 1,000 times, a case file with her name on it moved through the system, from intake to review to investigation to finding to action. And when it came out the other side, 14 airlines changed their boarding procedures and 212 airports updated their verification protocols, and a scanner that had been sitting on a counter, unused, 3 inches from a gate agent's hand, became the most important piece of equipment at the gate. 2 seconds. That's all it takes. 2 seconds to scan a boarding pass. 2 seconds to verify what's true. 2 seconds to treat a person as a passenger instead of a suspicion. 2 seconds. Renee Tillman had 22 minutes worth of 2-second chances. She used none of them. Angela Merritt had 1 chance to make a phone call. She used it. And everything changed. But I want to leave you somewhere specific, not at the policy level, not at the system level, at the human level. In a rocking chair in Atlanta at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, in a guest room with a lamp on low and a bassinet by the window. Angela was holding Elijah. His eyes were closed. His fist was wrapped around her index finger, the entire fist, all 5 fingers, barely circling the width of her one. He was 4 days old. He didn't know about gates or scanners or boarding passes. He didn't know that his grandmother had been blocked from a door that afternoon, or that she'd stood in front of a man's arm for 22 minutes, or that she'd made a phone call that would ripple through an industry for years. He didn't know any of it. He just knew the heartbeat. He just knew the warmth. Angela rocked. She hummed something her mother used to hum, something without words, just a melody that Dorothy used to carry through the house on Saturdays when she was cleaning and Angela was doing homework at the kitchen table. The melody didn't have a name. It was just theirs, Dorothy's and Angela's, and now Angela's and Elijah's. She looked at his face, brown skin, brand new, Unmarked by anything, yet no assumptions, no categories, no 1-second scans that sorted him before he'd spoken. He was just a baby, just a person, just a small, warm weight against her chest, breathing. She held him tighter, not too tight, just enough. The way you hold something you've been waiting to hold for a long time. The way you hold something you've traveled through 22 minutes of somebody else's smallness to reach. "I'm here," she whispered. "Grandma's here." He slept. She rocked. And somewhere in Charlotte, a scanner sat on a counter at gate B16. Tomorrow morning, a gate agent would pick it up. She would scan a boarding pass. The screen would show green. And a passenger, any passenger, every passenger would walk through the door. That's what Angela built. Not a monument, not a headline. A door that opens the same way for everyone. But what happened 6 months later, when Monique Stafford stood up at her college graduation and told the story of the woman at gate B16 to an auditorium of 2,000 people? That part hasn't been told yet. And it changed more than any phone call ever could.